Today on our special 200th episode, we'll be interviewing misinformation expert Professor Timothy Caulfield. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif Doja, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not a real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode, what we normally do is I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. But today is a very, very special episode. Today is our 200th episode, so we're going to be interviewing...
Happy birthday to us.
Well, it's not an annual thing that the episodes come out, but we'll be interviewing Professor Timothy Caulfield about his new book, The Certainty Illusion. He is an expert on debunking misinformation on the internet and everywhere. He's published numerous books, scientific papers. I think most people, especially in Canada, have heard of Dr. Caulfield, so we're very excited about this. Just before he joins us, Ali, anything that you want to talk about in celebration of our 200th episode? Any special memories you may have or fond episodes?
I like when people write in and say, it was fun when you made fun of Asif.
Yes.
I think as we go for 100 more, I would like to encourage more of that.
Okay.
In myself and in our listeners.
Okay, great. Yes, so in terms of other things that I've liked, obviously our interviews have been great. Some really big names, Dr. Glaucom Flecken, for example, Sidney McElroy back in the day, Biff Naked,
that was
pop
great,
superstar. So we've had some really good episodes. And I've also liked the ones where, I really learned a lot by researching it. The one that comes to mind is the one we did. I remember the one we did on pain and how women experience pain in the medical world versus men. And just was real eye-opening. There's things I didn't really know about. So those are just some thoughts of mine.
Sure. Dr. Jen Gunter was a fantastic interview as well. And there's a residual effect of doing this too, where then I sort of follow, Dr. Glaucom Flecken, I'll follow Dr. Jen Gunter, I'll follow these, Dr. Shapiro, we will have these people here, and then I follow them and continue to learn so much more than I did just in our interview and just in our research. So that's been really great.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully people will enjoy this interview coming up shortly. And of course, maybe there'll be 200 more episodes. Let's hope.
All right, so let's not waste any more time. Joining us on our 200th episode is Timothy Caulfield. I'll give you as brief an intro as I can, but this man has so many credits that it's quite difficult to distill this. Timothy is a professor in the Faculty of Law, not a doctor, we have that in common, and the School of Public Health, and he's a research director at the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta. He was the Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy for over 20 years. He has won numerous academic, science, communication, and writing awards. He's a member of the Order of Canada and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. He has written, hosted, and produced documentaries, including the award-winning TV show A User's Guide to Cheating Death. He contributes regularly to the popular press and is the author of national bestsellers, The Cure for Everything, Untangling the Twisted Messages About Health, Fitness, and Happiness. That's 2012. Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything When Celebrity Culture and Science Clash? That's from 2015. And Relax, Damn It, A User's Guide to the Age of Anxiety, which is from 2020. And his most recent book is called The Certainty Illusion, What You Don't Know and Why It Matters. It's #1 just last week as we're recording this. It is #1 in Canada. Timothy Caulfield, thank you for making time for us. We really appreciate you being here.
Really appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to this conversation, guys.
Well, why don't we get started by talking a bit about your background? I think a lot of people in Canada know who you are, especially from the COVID pandemic. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But maybe you can give us a bit of a background about you yourself and how you got involved in this war against misinformation.
I've been a interdisciplinary researcher kind of out of the gates. I finished my graduate school, my very first job. I worked for this wonderful academic, Bertha Maria Canopers, who's really one of my mentors. Mentors are so important. Am I right, guys? They're so
sure.
important. She was an interdisciplinary legal scholar and really out of the gate taught me, you can do empirical research. You can work with these big interdisciplinary science teams. You can do all this really exciting kind of out of the box research. And so I have a lot of gratitude for having Bartha kind of as that example. And so right out of the gate, I started doing, because I've always been interested in pop culture and how science is represented in the public sphere. So early days, I was doing research on how genomics and, the Human Genome Project is represented, not just, in newspapers, but also in movies and things like that. And then we did that in the context of stem cells. We've done a lot of research in the stem cell space, on stem cell policy and on unproven stem cell therapies, on stem cell hype. We've done that with microbiome work, et cetera. So I've been really fortunate to be able to do this really exciting work with big, science teams and really work with leading edge scientists. So I feel very privileged to be part of those communities, given my, sort of outsider status a little bit. This led me to realize that, hey, often science and health and really evidence more broadly, not portrayed great often, right? Often it's twisted, it's misrepresented, it's leveraged to support a particular agenda. And increasingly, this is a shift, something we maybe come back to, increasingly used to support particular political agendas, right? So I've just become incredibly fascinated with that. And of course, this led me into studying misinformation, especially with the rise of the wellness industry and alternative medicine, and all of the social media platforms have really just completely transformed the work that I do. And let's be honest, our world, they've, really shifted our world. Elections are won and lost as a result of the stuff we're talking about today. So yeah, it went from kind of a niche interest, talking about jade vagina eggs from Gwyneth Paltrow to the destruction of humanity. So it's been quite a ride.
Well, we want to get into all those things that you touched on, but I just, speaking of the social media, and you reference this in your book about the amount of hate that you kind of get, and I just know a very small amount of this. About 20 years ago, I published a review article on immunizations and autism, the lack of a link, as you well know this literature, as well as, there's a disease called vaccine encephalopathy was found to be due to a genetic mutation in a gene called SCN1A. So there was an alternate explanation for this. But even that, just publishing scientific articles, I wasn't interviewed by anyone, wasn't in the media. I would just get random hate emails all the time. And this was a bit before social media really took off. So I was spared with that. Just, I could just block the email and delete it, and that's it. But this, especially for you during COVID, just constant. So how do you do that? How do you just not throw up your arms with all this vitriol?
It is constant. It's absolutely constant. It's harassment. It's trolling.
And we're sorry to take you away from that important part of your day. I hope you don't mind this tiny break from
as we're speaking, it's rolling in. There's no doubt about it. And of course, on the social media platforms, it's really bad. It's really, really toxic. And of course, they're performing for their peers a little bit, right, on social media platforms. And I've been sued. You get death threats, and it is very, very tough. And I think, I'm a senior scholar. I'm a white male. Imagine being an assistant professor, a postdoc, and you want to get into this space and facing that, right? So I think this is a real issue that the institutions need to think about, because we need to look, as I'm old, I'm at the, different point in my career. We need to support scholars and voices and healthcare professionals and science communicators like you guys that want to get out there and spread the word, because we need those creative, science-informed voices out there. So this hate, it's real. It's a real issue. I have trainees that are, they're shocked by it, right? And I'm kind of used to it, but you can see their world being a little bit destabilized, and some of it can be scary. So we need institutions to support them as communities, but also legally. to know that they have their back legally if something emerges. And if I might, because I do think this is it's a kind of an interesting story, because it is, to experience of all of that on a personal level is fascinating, but it's also become a very common misinformation strategy. These are the smear campaigns, right? So you want to destabilize a voice that is pushing, delegitimize it, right? Something that you don't like. So you spread lies about this individual. It's a smear campaign. Maybe you say they're bought off by big pharma or by the Trudeau government, or et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, it's a very effective strategy, right? Every day when people see something they don't like about me, they post a lie about me they've heard elsewhere. And no matter what I say, I can't make them disbelieve, change their mind about the lie. Like a very common one is that I've been bought out by the government because I receive peer review research grants, right? And they'll post pictures of me from the university celebrating me receiving a CIHR grant or something like that, as if it's a gotcha, this you kind of thing moment. And it's unbelievably effective. But bigger scale, think of people like Fauci and, public health officials. Unfortunately, it's a very effective strategy, and we have to figure out as a community how to push back.
I do, in the middle of the night, I'll often do a little mini smear campaign against Asif just to keep him on his toes. And you're making me rethink all that, Tim. I don't know if it's been effective, hasn't it, Asif?
Yeah, that's
Can I
right.
comment on that?
Yeah.
I've got, buddies all over the world, and sometimes they'll go online, busting my chops a little bit, having fun with me. And a hate mailer will see it and think they're being
serious.
Oh, no.
Even this guy thinks you're an idiot. I'm
God.
like, he's like one of my best friends, or she's someone I've worked with for decades. What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah. My smearing is directly to Asif on this show. Although you could, using AI, that could be taken out of context. We better be careful, Asif.
It seems like he deserves it. So
see, Tim gets it right away.
Okay,
this is how these things spread. You just proved how easy it is for this to spread. One of my most credible friends, and taken down in a hot second. Yeah. I do want to talk to you, your book is, I would say it's relatively easy reading. And, I read quickly, but it is still somehow so dense. I found myself like, oh, we're into this topic now, we're into this topic. But I think there's a density to it also because of how many things I connected with. When you read something that you don't have personal experience with, I think it doesn't feel as dense and full of information. But this is like, I have my own experiences with a variety of things. So, for example, right out of the gate, you talk about your debate with William Davis. Dr. William Davis wrote a book called Wheat Belly, in case people aren't aware. So I'll tell you my own experience here. Tim, I was struggling with my weight, as I have many, many times in my life. And I read about a guy, we're going back about 8 years here. I read about a guy who lost 30 pounds by cutting out gluten. And I'm like, all right, I just got to find out what gluten is, and I'll do the same thing because I'm desperate. I've tried everything. What I haven't tried is eating less at that time. I didn't realize that was an option. But, I'm jogging. I'm like eating different things. I'm trying all kinds of, and, weight's spiraling out of control. Anyway, so I go, let me find out what gluten is. I find out gluten is this protein. I'm like, okay, if this guy can do it, he doesn't look like any hero. I see his picture and, it's like this, like a Via Rail magazine. It's nothing. He's not in a scientific magazine. He's just a guy, lost some weight. I figure out what gluten is. I look it up and I go, oh my God, gluten is in every single thing I love. This is going to be very difficult. But anyway, side note, I have this eczema on my shins that we used to make fun of my father, who had it as well. We would be like, my God, when you scratch your shins, you look like a dog in heat, Dad. And then fast forward 20, 30 years, guess who's got the exact same thing? And, my dad was always just prescribed corticosteroid creams, and nobody ever answered the question, why? Why does he get this? It's just a thing. It's accepted, and you take these steroidal creams for it. So now I have this thing on my shin. Anyway, I do this. I go gluten-free. I think I went like about 8 weeks. I went a couple of months, which was a huge deal to not eat pasta. And the landscape was such that we didn't have all these gluten-free products a decade ago. So I'm like really like just not eating pasta. I'm just not eating bread. There's no like gluten-free options. And I am pretty proud of myself. I do lose some weight. And then I'm going to celebrate myself. I'm going to have a full day, a tribute to gluten day. I'm going to have pizza for lunch. I'm going to have pasta at night and have a few beers, which I've been avoiding. And I don't know what the timeline was, but within 24 hours, my shins just lit up. And I hadn't even noticed that my eczema or whatever this is had gone away. I hadn't even noticed it. And then it came back angrier than ever. And then all of a sudden I made this, I drew this little conclusion, of course, anecdote, not evidence. That's our whole show, Asif and I, anecdotes versus evidence. But I was like, oh, that's very interesting. But I was particularly interested because nobody could ever tell my dad why he had eczema. And now I'm like, okay, so I have some. So I go to my doctor at the time and I said, I think I might have some gluten intolerance. And he goes, that's not really a thing. I said, if you want, he said, if you want, we can give you a test for celiacs. And I thought, how interesting that now you're interested if it's celiacs, but if I say I think it's something else, you're not interested, you dismiss it outright. So from that perspective, I read Wheat Belly as a guy who wanted some answers. And I thought, I don't know what the number was in the end. It was like 2,000 patients he had, and he told them, get off of gluten. And he found all this stuff. I wasn't and in fact, there was a couple of chapters where I was like, this is way too information heavy. This is way too science heavy. And you say it wasn't really science. It was buzzwords. It was enough to get me like, I'm just fast forwarding through those chapters. But I thought it was illustrative for me in that case. Tell me about what you do with a guy like me who thinks that, there was some valuable information about gluten in a book like Wheat Belly.
I love your story, and I think it highlights so many interesting themes that we see emerge in something like the gluten-free trend. And by the way, I'm obsessed with the gluten-free trend. Maybe too much so. I started writing about it as soon as it started. In responding to you, I'm going to conclude with my conclusion, and then I'll circle back.
Got it.
There's never been any evidence that going gluten-free is inherently healthier. If you have celiacs and there is non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that's sort of still a condition that is being investigated. The numbers, vary. Some in the research community are more skeptical than others, but let's say that exists, but you're looking at single digits percentage-wise of the individuals that might fall into that category. Going gluten-free also seems to may have some relevance to other conditions like POTS, but that's not how it's being marketed. On Wheat Belly, et cetera, it's being marketed as going gluten-free is inherently healthier, and you're going to lose weight, and you're going to have all these other kind of benefits. And there's never been any evidence to support that. And from the time of Wheat Belly to now, the evidence is just piled up to suggest this isn't the case. And kind of on the contrary, a colleague of mine at University of Calgary did research to show that gluten-free foods are often less healthy, right? Because of the products they have to use to make them, right? So, and people do not lose weight going gluten-free. Also, kind of on the contrary, right? You go gluten-free because you have a clinically diagnosed reason for going gluten-free. That's the reality. Despite that, the gluten-free industry has become massive. And as I argue in the book, gluten-free has emerged as a health halo. If we did a survey and we went outside, I think most people would think the gluten-free label means it's healthier, right? Again, zero evidence to support it. And it really has been a trend that was created by pop culture, by Gwyneth Paltrow, and other, the wellness industry. And, the Wheat Belly book is a really good example, I think, of science exploitation because he uses sciencey language. He uses animal studies. He uses studies out GMOs that have really no connection to the conclusions he's making. And the other reason I think it took off, and your story really highlights this, is the way that every fad diet works. The way that every fad diet works is people start concentrating on what they're eating for a beat, for a moment, for a couple of weeks, and they lose weight. They lose weight because they're thinking about what they're eating, and they attribute that weight loss to the diet. And then when they put weight back on, just like you, right? You blame yourself, your self-control, your willpower. Curse you, willpower. The diet still lives on as a myth. That's the phenomenon and how it plays out. And the other interesting thing, and I joke about this in the book, if you kind of counter that narrative, say this isn't true, you're the baddie. You're the downer, you're the individual.
Yeah, as you have been.
And even for you, and you can speak to this, you're kind of questioning people's lived experience, right? When you say that, right? I have a gut problem, and then when I go gluten-free, I feel better, and you're telling me I think we have to be really careful. Sometimes I think I err. I make mistakes the way I talk about it, maybe even right in this moment, because I think we have to listen to those stories, right? And have to respect them and not mock them. So I try to aim my ire on the Gwyneth Paltrows of the world and not the patients that are having these individual experiences. So, whatever works for you, but I want individuals to be scientifically informed in their decision making. And by the way, they have done double-blinded studies on people's experiences with gluten and found people can't tell the difference, right? Their sort of digestive experiences. Not, of course, if you have this celiac, that difference, but I'm talking about, individuals that say that they feel better. So it is a fascinating phenomenon. And the other reason I find it interesting is it's no longer headline grabbing, Gwyneth Paltrow and other celebrities saying they're going gluten-free. But despite, there's other ones that have kind of taken its place, the carnivore diet, intermittent fasting, we could, go on about all of them. But the industry continues to grow. It hasn't dissipated. It hasn't gone away. And that's another interesting phenomenon, as I argue in the book. Often when science exploitation is in the mix, this phenomenon lives on. They live on, right? And a lot of the health halos I talk about in the book have this sort of a similar life history.
Right. Yeah. These blind tests are interesting too. So I have a background as a chef, and I have a lot of respect for the.
Oh, so a lot of things in the book relevant too.
Very, very relevant. So that's what I say. When I say it was dense, I was like really combing through and rereading and sort of excited by some of it too. This is more a book about science just because of my dumb brain. Sometimes I'm like a little bit lost, and that wasn't the case here. More than that, I was quite the opposite. I was digging in on a bunch of things.
So last night I had sushi. We had sushi. I'm a big sushi fan, right? And I don't know if you got to the sushi section in the book.
I have.
We have a really close connection to Japan. My future son-in-law is Japanese. My sister-in-law is Japanese. Both my kids have spent long periods of time, two of my kids, long periods of time in Japan. I love visiting Japan. We love sushi, right? And it was a Japanese study. I think it's important to recognize that. Did not find a difference from a taste perspective. And you think how obsessed Japan is with sushi. Between fresh sushi and frozen sushi, right? They could not blind a test tell the difference, which is really remarkable. Now, when you say that, I think it's also important to recognize, and you're a chef, so this is really, I think, relevant to you, the ritual matters, right? The experience matters. So when you talk about a data point like that, all the other things that come with an experience are still relevant. We shouldn't take the magic out of that, right? If people enjoy the experience of eating fresh sushi that costs, what was it, $6 million, that one tuna guy?
Yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
Go to it. Same with red wine or whatever, right? We don't take the magic out of the experience. But it's still incredible how powerful our cognitive biases are, and this power of suggestion and the ability of our world to shape our perceptions.
Got it.
I want to talk about some parts of the book that I really found fascinating to me, and I want to ask you more about. So obviously, I mentioned before the COVID-19 pandemic. That's when I really became aware of you and, followed you online and would read your tweets. And there was obviously a lot of misinformation going on. We all know that, perpetrated by many people, including the former and now current president of the US. But I was struck by something you mentioned, which I never heard about before, is this phenomenon called the white hat bias. Could you speak a bit about that to our listeners? Because I think they may not have been aware of this either.
The white hat bias, and this is an interesting behind the scenes comment. I wanted to change the name of it because there's a little bit of a not ideal cultural,
yes, that's
with white hat versus black hat. So I wanted to call it something else. And the editor goes, no, let's just stick with white hat bias. You're being too sensitive here. So the white hat bias is the idea that if the research is focused on something that is noble, that is viewed as righteous, that is viewed as forwarding something that is worthwhile, you're more likely that, first of all, there's a research bias that happens. So you're more likely to have a positive result. And in the book, I talk about these biases are everywhere. Science isn't perfect. It's a process. And as you guys know well, we always recognize those biases exist and we do our best to try to root them out. But the white hat bias, you're more likely to get a positive result, more likely to get it published, more likely to get, headlines about it. And you see it with frivolous things like coffee, I think, is good for you. People would love that to be true, right? You see it with, I think, a lot of the organic food, it feels intuitively correct. One of the areas and that would be, it feels noble and righteous, right? And the other really good example, I think, is mindfulness. And mindfulness is on my list of things I've changed my mind about. We maybe come back to that idea of scientific humility, right? Because out of the gate, I'm a cynic, right?
Me too, yeah.
It sounds a little, airy-fairy, a little new agey. It can't be right. So I've kind of changed my mind on mindfulness. But despite, I think there's, in other words, I think there's emerging evidence on its value in some really interesting places too. And the science, but there's still a massive amount of hype around mindfulness. And some of that hype was driven by, I think, the white hat bias. The term was coined in the context of obesity research, actually. Some researchers in the United States were looking at, people want these interventions to work. Obesity is a major health concern, public health concern. And so there's this white hat bias for obesity interventions that lead to over positive representations of the research. But there's some studies, not a lot, so I have to think we have to be careful not to overinterpret that. Also in the context of COVID, especially around COVID therapies. People wanted these COVID therapies to work, so you were more likely, again, to get positive results and have those results represented in the public sphere. So yeah, the white hat bias, and I think it's a good one to emphasize, right? Because we always think of conflicts of interest as being kind of the baddies, it's big pharma, it's, some, evil government pushing something. So I think it's a good example of how nuanced biases can be, even when it's something kind of good, right? That we want to work. I also think it's an example of, you guys know this, science is hard, man. It's hard. And usually it doesn't work out, right? Usually it doesn't work out. And, the chance of an animal study making it to clinical application is so small, right? So if you see an animal study, be suspicious. Even a clinical trial, phase 1 clinical trial, actually making it to the clinic, so rare. And if it does make it to the clinic, almost for sure, the effect size is going to be smaller than initially promised, right? So again, it's easy to get cynical about this. I'm entering the cynical phase of my career, I guess. But that's a reality. And I think the white hat bias emphasizes that too, right? Because we want these things to work. I think the mindfulness story is a good example of that, right? It was huge over promises early days. Who wouldn't want something as simple and kind of, with this interesting, rich history to it, to have all these really powerful effects? And of course, it never plays out that way.
I think as well about almost kind of the opposite area, which is an MD after your name gives a certain amount of weight. So the story is, Ali sent me a Instagram reel the other day. It's this guy's, he was a neurologist, even though the caption said urologist, which is a common misinterpretation.
That's captions not doing their
that's
job.
Right. That's right.
That's AI failure.
So this guy was talking, here's what you got to do to improve your kids' minds. I'm like, okay, let's hear. Okay, so make sure they get a good night's sleep. Okay, that's good. Eating unprocessed foods, lots of vegetables, kind of Mediterranean diet. Okay, that sounds good.
Exercise, probably.
Exercise, exactly. I'm like, great. Okay. Oh, and raw milk. Oh, where did this come from? So then it's like it's credible. He's an MD. Ali's like, yeah, this is what we should be talking about more. Ali said that was his message to me. We got to talk about this more. I'm like, yeah, we could, but what about the raw milk stuff? So
I sent it to you because of the raw milk stuff, and that the reason we should be talking about it is this idea that you discuss in your book. What do you do with somebody who has an MD background, MD designation, and then has something that sort of exists? That's
the question, yeah.
Best case, fringes, worst case, something fully debunked by science. That's why I sent that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the question to you. What do you do with those individuals?
I mean, it's a great question. And you guys probably know this. There's been interesting studies, one published in JAMA not that long ago, say last year, talking about the impact of MDs on the spread of misinformation. And what you just described, I think, is, I find, I get frustrated about so many things, but this is one of the things I get most frustrated about for all the reasons that you identify, right? Of course, you're supposed to get good night's sleep and exercise, and this person didn't invent that, right? But then they drop the BS. And that sort of describes the MAHA movement, right? The Make America Healthy Again movement that we're seeing in the United States. People are saying, oh, how can you be against it? What are you for bad food? What are you for not exercising? Of course not. I've been advocating for this for decades. But there's no evidence to support drinking raw milk. Because those things are right doesn't make this right. One of the things I find fascinating is this political shift in, I'm curious if this influencer, if you went and you dug into it, where sort of this individuals resides in the info sphere, right? Because I've seen this fascinating shift where all those things that were they used to be kind of new agey, wellness, kind of lefty, counterculture. Now exercise is a right-wing thing. I mean, it's like, because if you're a soy boy, a lefty libtard soy boy, and by the way, I'm not going to talk about my politics. Somehow you're against, exercise and sleeping, and unfortunately, it's a very effective strategy. So that's my rant about that kind of noise, because you wrap pseudoscience in a blanket of sensibility, right? Or common sense, right? You're either with us or against us. That's a really, unfortunately, an effective argument style called the Mott and Bailey, which we can come back to. Right. I touch on it in the book. But more broadly speaking, I think we need to push back against when a professional says this. I think other professionals need to speak up respectfully. We need to talk about what the scientific consensus, the body of evidence, actually says respectfully. I also think professional organizations need to do more, and I'm worried in this current political environment, they're going to feel cowed. And we're seeing hints of that. And just doing it respectfully. They don't necessarily have to burn this individual down, but they can just say, here's actually what the body of evidence says. And I also think institutions and regulators like universities, et cetera, they need to do more. We need to have access to what the scientific consensus says on these topics, especially when it's something like raw milk, which is demonstrably false, right? It's not like, oh, there's these reasonable arguments to be made around this. It really is ridiculous. Hey, and by the way, having said that, and this is something I wrote about in my last book, I totally recognize that you could go your whole life drinking raw milk and nothing goes wrong, right? Sure. You could drive your entire life without a seatbelt on, but that doesn't make seatbelt laws stupid.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand the risks are low, but let's be honest about what the science says. And also, there's no evidence of the benefit. And I get a little bit frustrated the degree to which pop culture will kind of have this false balanced presentation of these arguments. There was an article in, I think, New York Times recently that, it said it was nonsense, but maybe there's benefit microbiome to raw milk. No, there's no good evidence to support this. And even if there is, the benefits are, and I don't think there is, I want to emphasize that, would be so minute that who are we kidding? It's not really going to have an impact on your health, on a measurable health outcome. So don't portray it as if it does. Sorry, you wound me up there, and I went.
Oh my God, I feel real bad about the next question I wanted to ask you, because it might be more winding. You mentioned you're entering the cynical phase of your career. Your timing on cynicism couldn't be worse, obviously, with MAHA coming in. And I did want to dig in just a little bit, as much as your own blood pressure will allow, Timothy. But RFK's appointment was something significant enough. But now also in the last week, Trump comes in and immediately cutting funding to NIH, withdrawing from the World Health Organization. I don't even know what my question is, other than, I guess I'm looking to you for something hopeful. How do you feel about it, and what's...
It's absolutely horrifying. I wish I had, a less grim view of it. It's absolutely horrifying. I actually think massive damage has already been done because of the degree to which the discourse around RFK Jr. has normalized and sort of legitimized and sane-washed, completely disproven, incredibly harmful bits of misinformation, and sort of normalized very harmful voices in our information environment. So not just RFK Jr.'s, it's sort of like they've moved this discourse to sort of middle America, and I fear, really middle Earth to the entire planet now is talking about this stuff as if are there bits of it that are true? And look, RFK Jr., he is a genuinely evil force, because either he has a complete inability to understand science. He is either willfully ignoring science, or he knows the science, understands it, and still pushes lies that are killing people, mostly kids. The guy is an incredibly evil force. And it's not, you guys know this, it's not just in the context of vaccines. It's in the context of, his view on HIV, his view on psychiatry, you can go down the list. And the idea that he has somehow novel or brave views on processed food and is a complete bait and switch, right? People, public health officials have been advocating for healthy foods environments for decades, for exercise for decades. MAHA did not invent this. They're trying to take the high ground. It's by suggesting or representing their positions as if they're the good guys, when it's just an evil force, right? And important also with MAHA, you can't point to a single evidence-informed strategy that they're proposing, right? It's not like they're going, we are going to make healthy food environments by doing X, Y, Z. We're going to ban processed food ads in the United States. Yeah, the Republicans are going to do that. They're not even suggesting it, and there's no way it would happen, right? We're going to have better built environments throughout all of the United States so people can commute better, and we're going to deal with socioeconomics and injustice and equity because we know that's the biggest driver of mortality in the United States. None of it, right? It's just grandstanding, and it's absolutely infuriating. And if I might, speaking of blood pressure, the other, other thing I find enraging and breaks my heart a little bit is the amount of sane washing that is happening, both in the mainstream media. So by that, I mean, it's not all going to be bad. We've got to learn to work.
Right.
It's just, that breaks my heart. And also among academics. I was at an event, speaking at an academic event. So this wasn't like for the general public. It was an academic event at UCSF in San Francisco in December. And these were misinformation scholars. And the degree to which they were kind of rolling over was absolutely heartbreaking. I just
not
could
fighting
not
back
believe
against what's going on in the US.
Yeah, they're like, well, maybe the new head of the NIH won't be so bad. Oh, RFK Jr., maybe we should reframe how we're doing research on misinformation. It was absolutely heartbreaking. I got to be careful the words I use because these are some colleagues of mine. Not all of them, right? There were rumblings in the crowd. You can imagine how this was playing out. But just incredible. And then, you see the minister in the United States speaking to Donald Trump, who is 40 feet from her while she's making, saying these brave statements. We need more of that, more of those kinds of brave, sensible, evidence-informed, respectful, positive comments, and less sane washing, please.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Asif and I would talk about this, when COVID first sort of appeared on our radar, there was a lot of trust me, bro, more than vibes. It was like a complete movement, the trust me, bro movement across social media.
I'm just asking questions. The Joe Rogan thing, right? I'm just asking questions.
I'm just asking questions. Well, trust me, bro was more like, you cannot get the vaccine. Trust me, bro. And you just look up this person and it's like, you're an HR recruiter. What?
Yeah.
You have there's nothing you do why would I trust you? I barely know you. I don't even really know you. And now that's who's running
that's
policy.
Who's now running the government.
Yeah.
The other thing is the revisionist history has been shocking, right? The pandemic just happened. It just happened. And now they're talking like it's accepted fact. It's a truism that the vaccines didn't work, that COVID was overstated, that
lockdowns didn't save lives.
Yeah, that one in particular, right? The masks don't work, lockdowns were. Meantime, we know there's no evidence to support any of that. The vaccine saved probably over 10 million lives. Some put it as many as 20 million lives on planet Earth. We know that, I don't even like the phrase lockdown, but we know the public health measures save lives.
Yeah.
Do we need to learn and do better? We were in the middle of a pandemic.
Of course.
We can learn how to do better. We can study these initiatives. Do things like school closures work? Incredibly complex question with all these different variables that we need to study, risks and benefits. But there's no doubt that they saved lives overall. And we know this for a bunch of reasons. And also, by the way, the United States performed terribly. In the OECD, they
Exactly.
performed amongst the worst. And the reason they performed worse, not because they did too much, is because they didn't do enough. And then they point to Sweden, which is the irony of the far right pointing to Sweden as a beacon is hilarious. Absolutely. Here's this country that has a deep connection to community, and many of the people in Sweden followed, I know you guys know this, they followed public health measures without a government request, because that's what people in Sweden do. So, oh my God, it's just absolutely incredible. And the degree to which this revisionist history is now taken as a truism, like it's not even taken as something to be debated anymore, is remarkable.
In our last few minutes, I know we have to let you go soon. I'm going to change the subject a bit, because in your book, you don't just talk about medical misinformation. It's a big part of the book, but it's not the only thing. So I did want to talk about pop culture for a second and misinformation. You talk about social media a lot. You may know which one I'm...
It's possible that this might anger Timothy even more.
Exactly. I think it will. So you're a self-professed pop culture fan. What do you think about this misinformation campaign waged against Blake Lively by Justin Baldoni? Just so people know what I'm talking about, Blake Lively was in a movie with Justin Baldoni, came out last summer, and people noticed online they're not doing press with the guy. He was the main actor and the director, one of the producers as well. And then you may have also heard in the fall, there were a lot of negative things being said about Blake Lively, about how she's very dismissive, rude, a mean girl. That kind of came out, and that's what I saw. But then, well, I guess we could talk about what happened and what has been uncovered by the New York Times and others about what went on.
Yeah, I love this topic. I'm glad I've been following it super close. And it maps what happened with Johnny Depp and
Amber Heard.
Amber Heard, yeah.
The Amber, let's start with that. The Amber Heard story is, because it's a great example of the power of, our information environment. Just, it's in the ether, right? It's in the ether. And I was a really busy time in my life, and I know the world was obsessed with Amber Heard and the Johnny Depp story. But even though I'm a pop culture fan, I didn't follow it that closely. But I kind of got the vibe that, she was, I don't like this term, but she was crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And that was a very effective campaign by the Johnny Depp camp, right? That just entered the ether. And everyone just took it, again, as I'll use the word, as a truism. Oh, I don't know who's right, but she's clearly crazy. Right. Not a great, it's kind of an offensive term. The same thing is happening here. So these are coordinated campaigns that use social media, they use influencers, they put little bits of information throughout our information environment that at a minimum make it difficult to get a sense of what's really happening. But the goal is to shift the narrative. And it was effective in both cases. And it's a really good example of the subtle forces that shape how we perceive the world, even when you're talking about something as frothy as the entertainment industry. There's a great documentary podcast about the Amber Heard situation that kind of unpacks who was really behind the social media campaigns. And it's, I don't want to ruin it because it's a real shocker, but it is incredible how effective it was. And it probably won the case for Johnny Depp. And in this situation, we're seeing it have an impact too. But I think that what's fascinating with the Blake Lively story is we learned and we're a little bit more ahead of it. And so now we're hearing about the campaign as it's unfolding. Does that make sense?
Exactly. I think that is the difference. That the fact that people think, oh, I can't be fooled. This is what your whole book is about. I can't be fooled by this misinformation, by these bots, by these influencers. But you were. That just happened 6 months ago when you thought Blake Lively was a horrible person, right? Like you just did that.
It's a great example of like to check yourself, right? Because I was fooled.
Yeah, me too.
I was fooled. And I'm like totally plugged into pop culture. And I'm like, oh my God, Blake Lively. And also I have this tendency to kind of maybe, I am a lip-tard soy boy, so err on the side of the Blake Lively. That's my out of the gate position. And despite that, I still thought, oh, it sounds like she's real prima donna or something, right?
I'm going to go on record and say I was not fooled. And you know why I wasn't fooled? Because of my love for Ryan Reynolds. And somewhere in my brain, I said,
trust his taste.
Those two are together, Ryan can do no wrong. And clearly now
that's the Yoko Ono defense. Did you know that? Like, John loves Yoko.
Right.
I love
Therefore, Yoko. Exactly. Yeah. Now it's not always going to go in my favor. This is one day something bad's going to happen and I'm going to be not my Ryan. And they're going to be like, you don't know him, you idiot. And I'm like, that's true. Yeah. Okay. We have a little bit of time left. Final question for you that will, I don't know. I thought it would end on a lighthearted note, but maybe your answer will be some, what do you call these, like investigative movies that really blow cases wide open. But the question is your top 3 movies and your top 3 TV shows from 2024.
Okay,
just
top
from last
3.
Year. Just from
okay,
last year.
So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say movies I saw in 2024. Is that fair?
That's
sure.
fair.
Yeah, some of them bleed into late 2023. I had a sense that maybe I might ask this, despite that, this is a little bit off the top of the head. I loved Godzilla -1. Did you guys see that?
It's still
this
on my
is a
list.
Japanese movie, not the Godzilla King Kong movie, which I also watched because I love sci-fi. But it won the Academy Award for sci-fi last year. I mean, for special effects. Incredibly beautiful, thoughtful, great. The art direction is fantastic. I also did like Substance. I know it's like a little bit on the nose to say that with Demi Moore and Substance. I thought that was great. For TV shows, I loved, too obvious, Shogun. Everyone loved that. I also loved, oh my gosh, what's it called? This is embarrassing. I'm going to check my notes here. Oh, Fallout.
Oh yeah,
I loved
Fallout was fun.
Again, the art direction, absolutely incredible. And oh my gosh, what else did I love? There's so much. The problem is there's so much great content out there. I still love. Are there shows that you guys rewatch?
I'm a massive rewatcher. I'll rewatch rather than watch something new more often. It's ridiculous, but yeah.
Veep is Veep. Like,
oh God, yeah.
It's insane, the quality of the writing on Veep and the acting. I think I've gone through it 3 times.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Veep it never fails you.
Now I can't watch it because it reminds me of what's happening. So
yeah, I know. Well, this was what Iannucci, what's his first name? The director, creator of the show.
Armando
Iannucci got very difficult because the parody became more difficult to do. The satire was like, well, we actually can't be funnier than what Trump is actually doing.
Yeah, it's not satire anymore, right? They're just sort of acting it out.
So I can imagine that makes it a bit challenging to watch it now. But I love the Tony. I mean, there's so many different dynamics that I love, but Tony Hale and Julia Dreyfus together, I mean, that guy, one of the most underrated, phenomenal comedic actors. I love her.
She is incredible.
Oh, she's incredible. Yeah. It's really good. And you know what else I really love? I had watched The Wire many years ago. Then I was on a movie and I meet a guy there are extras on a movie and there's somebody called the SSE, Special Skills Extra. So he was a cop and he was able to use guns and stuff like this. So I asked him, I was like, when you watch cop shows, is it easy for you to watch them or do you go, that would never happen? We don't do that. And he goes, that is 99% of the time I can't watch them because I'm like, we would never do that. That would never happen. The only show that was the most real show was The Wire. And that was both horrifying, if you think about the kind of things that were happening in The Wire, and also very compelling. And so I went and rewatched The Wire, and I've been having thoughts about going to rewatch it again. That was 5 years ago.
I should rewatch it because I haven't watched it since, it came out.
It's really enjoyable. And if you watch it from the perspective of like actors' choices, directorial choices, and storyline, it's again, even more fulfilling.
So another great show on my list is Say Nothing. It's out now.
Yeah, I know about it. I haven't watched it.
It's amazing. I loved the book. The book was incredible. I have a little bit of a connection. I actually lived in Ireland when the Troubles was happening. Oh, wow. And so I was a little kid. So, but it is a really great show. Really great.
Great recommendation. I don't know why I slept on Shogun, but I often do that. I did the same with Game of Thrones. I just wait. I'm like, let me make sure everyone in society has watched this, and then I'll get into
Shogun was one of those shows that I was like, oh, it cannot be okay. I'm not going to watch it. It can't be that good. I'm not going to really like. It's a remarkable. It's incredible. It's one of those shows like you think I don't get the economics here. Like, how are they making this?
Yeah.
I don't get. It was shot in Vancouver.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Port Moody.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is also incredible. But yeah, don't sleep on Godzilla -1.
Yeah,
like
I definitely want to see. And in fact, one of our listeners messaged us last year to say, you guys need to watch this. And now it's been a year and we still haven't. So it's going to be on my list.
They nail the look. Like it still has that analog vibe, but it's just seamless, I think.
Awesome. All right. We ended in a positive place. One thing I will say, if it ever happens, you spoke about your humility in science and your ability to change your mind from time. If you ever change your mind on some organic food tasting better than non-organic, let's have another chat about that. I swear by carrots. I will buy regular carrots. They are as bland as a piece of cardboard. And then we buy organic carrots. And I just, I imagine with a better quality of soil, that's why they're sweeter. I feel that way about peppers.
Is it organic? Is it the freshness? Is it, what is the actual mechanism that's doing that? Now, I'm a total hypocrite. And I think I joke about this in the book because we shop, my amazing partner shops at a farmer's market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love carrots. And there's a bag of fresh farmer's market carrots in my fridge right now. I'll probably have 4 today.
So. There you go. There you go. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on the book. It is a wonderful read. I'll mention again that it's called The Certainty Illusion, What You Don't Know and Why It Matters. And as we've suggested in this last hour, it matters now more than ever. Your timeliness is noted on this book. I'm sure part of you would rather it wasn't so unbelievably prescient, I believe is a pronunciation. But here we are. Yeah, I think it matters more than ever to read this book.
Thank you so much, you guys. Really enjoyed the chat and appreciate all that you do.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you, Timothy.
So that's our interview with Dr. Tim Caulfield. I think he was such a great guest to have on for our 200th episode. I learned a lot. I think he really challenges our way of thinking to not accept everything that we think we're so certain about. And check out his book, The Certainty Illusion, out in bookstores now, wherever you get your books. It was such a great read. Let us know what you guys thought about this episode. Anything else you want to hear in the next 200 episodes, perhaps, let us know. drbcomedian@gmail.com, Dr. B Comedian on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We are everywhere. Ali, what do you got going on for mid to late March?
Canada Reads. You head to cbcbooks.ca, and there's still time for you to do your reading. This is a national literary debate. If you want to get in on it and be part of it, still time for you to read some of the literature that we'll be profiling that week. It's something I love being part of. And so, yeah, Canada Reads, or you go to cbcbooks.ca and find out all the information there.
But one more thing before you guys go. Remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.